The Sabbath is the cornerstone of the Jewish faith. It comes into this story at the very beginning on the seventh day when we learn that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So the Sabbath is our way of testifying to that belief, that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. And Jews are very quick to tell you that more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. It's the one day a week that we look forward to for 6 days. There are people who rest so they can have a great week. We have a great week so that we can rest. And the Sabbath begins 18 minutes before sunset, Friday evening. The family prepares, showers, cleans the home, cooks, all that stuff. We have to prepare for the important things in life. And the Sabbath is ushered in with the lighting of the candles, the Sabbath candles by the mother or the women of the home. Go to synagogue, we come home, we have a wonderful meal, we catch up. And like one of my students says, the Sabbath creates real presence, not with a T, but with a C. The Sabbath is a day when we're present in God's world. We learn to appreciate what we have and who we have and where we are. And Saturday is just a wonderful day, Shabbat, of spending time in synagogue, of praying, of studying, of real soulful rest and spiritual rejuvenation. It's important that people realize that the kind of rest we have in the Sabbath is the way that God rested from creation. For example, what's the first thing God created? Light. So we don't create light on the Sabbath. We don't turn lights on, we don't turn lights off. Creative rest is different than the American concept of rest where you sit back on the couch and you drink a beer and you watch a football game. Our rest is a thoughtful rest. It's a very, very calculated rest. And these are things that we do every single week as little children through our adulthood. And it's the kind of rest that really allows us to lead meaningful lives and to be thoughtful about how our week's going to be. The vignette is, we meet with Christian clergy, the Jewish clergy and Christian clergy. And one day, Christian clergy came to our meeting and said, "Rabbi, I saw you on the Saturday pushing your kids in a stroller from the synagogue home. And I was so envious of the fact that you really get a Sabbath." He was saying to himself, on my Sunday, I work because I'm a clergy. And I was saying, well, I'm a clergy too, but I keep the Sabbath. And not a week goes by when I don't get a phone call from Christians wanting to know more about the Sabbath, Shabbat. Not only, the day of the week, but how we do it. I get calls from clergy and from Christians, from parishioners, wanting to know why we do certain things, what we do. So you don't carry a wallet, you don't carry, how do you get into your house? There is a genuine, authentic interest in the unadulterated Shabbat. People want to know, and I'm not sure if this ever happened in history before, and I'm not sure where it's going to lead to, but it's very exciting to know that people in the world are opening their eyes and understanding how important and how incredibly wonderful the gift of Shabbat is. I believe the first reference to Jerusalem appears early in Genesis, Malki Tzedek and Ir Shalem, the city of peace. And it's not referred to by name in much of the Torah. It's referred to as the place that I will choose, the place that I have chosen. But we know as the story unfolds that the forefathers set foot and have significant events in Jerusalem, generation after generation after generation. A little bit later on, after most of Canaan is recaptured, King David makes Jerusalem the capital of Israel. First of all, he names it David's city, or King David's city. It used to be the Jebusite city. He brings up the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, and he makes that the capital of the state of Israel 2,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, apologize. Since then, Jerusalem has clearly been the capital of Israel. It's been on all of our prayers. We're always praying for return to the place that God chose, to Jerusalem, to the Holy Temple. There's a reason why Jerusalem was chosen as a place for the Holy Temple. It's not only the center of the Jewish state, it's the center of the world. If you go to Israel today and you see that site with the Wailing Wall and the churches, and you hear the mosque, the call to prayer, you know it's the center of the world. It's most specifically, originally, the Jewish capital, and that's been kind of branched out and shared. I want to tell a personal story about Jerusalem. My first trip to Jerusalem, I was in 5th grade. My parents took all 5 kids. And Jerusalem's really our home. And even though I grew up in Schenectady, New York, it's still our home. So how old are you in 5th grade? You're about 10 years old. It's dark at night. It's probably 7 or 8 o'clock. My dad reaches out his wallet and takes out 100 shekels for me and 100 shekels for my brother and says, okay, boys, go, have fun, do whatever you want. We were in Ben Yehuda Street. And what that did is it made us understand that we were home. When you're home, you can't get lost. When you're home, there are no strangers. When you're home, everyone takes care of one another. And so from that early stage on, I was able to adapt and understand from the prayers and the history we learned to what it really meant to being home. I have a sister that lives in Israel, lived in Jerusalem for several years. We have family in Jerusalem. And it's very, very easy to understand once you walk the streets of Jerusalem why it's home, not only to you, but everyone in your family and everyone in your nation. A bunch of our prayers on a daily basis pray for the return of God's divine presence to Jerusalem and for return of the fires of Israel. We're not exactly sure what that means, but what we know from our tradition is that the third temple will come from heaven. It will not necessarily be built with wood from Syria and the same raw materials that the first two temples were built. And whether that means it's a spiritual temple or not is not the point. The point is the third temple will usher in the unity of the Jewish people and will be a point where the world realizes that Jerusalem is the center of the world and God makes the world go. Rav Kook talks about whether the third temple will have animal sacrifices or perhaps plant sacrifices, that humanity has continued to evolve since the destruction of the second temple. Perhaps we don't need animal sacrifices anymore. We have Jews who have fabricated the vessels for the third temple in preparation, and also in education, showing us what the prior temples looked like and what may occur at the third temple. They have fashioned the silver trumpets and the menorah to bring light into the world. So we're not exactly sure what the third temple will look like. We do believe it will come when there's peace in the world, when there's Jewish unity. And like it says in the prophets, it'll be a house that all the nations will call the house of God. And we know that was the case in the first temple and the second temple. And the idea is that the temple of God is a temple that's recognized by everyone around the world. And so we pray for that 3 times a day in our Amidah service. We pray for it. We pray for the return of God's divine presence to Jerusalem. We pray for the return of the Davidic reign to Israel. We pray for justice. And we pray for return of the fires of Israel. I mean, it's unbelievable. Right now, what's left of the temple? A wall, which isn't even a wall of the temple. It's a wall that held up the mound the temple stood on. And when groups from all over the world come to Israel, whether they're from Japan or Nigeria or South America or Africa, right? They come and they realize how significant, how important this place is, and they touch the wall and they cry and they connect. And so that's a remnant of a supporting wall of the structure of the Temple Mount. Imagine what the temple will make people feel like. I think everybody would agree that when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we're praying for the peace for all people. It just happens to be that my people haven't been given that opportunity. You know, what we need to do is we need to honor everyone's right to exist. Everyone is created in the image of God. Everyone is godly. And we have to take that Jewish message and that Christian message and broadcast that loud and clear. And when the residents of Jerusalem and the others in the neighborhood agree that everyone has the right to live, then there will be peace in Jerusalem. The state of Israel is much more than the heart of the Jewish people. It's the heart, but it's also the body of the Jewish people. And God promises Abraham 2 things. He promises descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky, and he promises a promised land. And on the one hand, we know this covenant is eternal. We believe the promises of the Bible. We know that there will always be an Israel. But we don't know what that Israel will look like. We don't know how that Israel will be defended. We don't know how many Jews and others will die in protection of Israel. Israel is the body of the Jewish people and the heart of the Jewish people. And as an American Jew, it's more important to me. It's even more important. I know that if anything, God forbid, happens to me, I have a place to go. But even more than that, Israel is my sense of pride. It's my identity. It's my soul. The state of Israel is immensely important, and you could see the posture of Jews after 1967 in America, like this, all of a sudden like that. We believed that our state was going to be there to stay, that this was the return of the covenant. This is the Israel that's going to usher in the Messiah in the final days. So Israel is immensely important. And the questions we have to ask are, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to help Israel? What do we want Israel to look like? Is Israel going to be like this? Is Israel going to be like this? Is Israel going to be weak? Is it going to be strong? Is it going to be proud? Is it going to be ashamed? And what role are we going to play in that destiny? One of my favorite places in Israel is the Judean desert. First of all, there's a lot of biblical history that happens in the desert. And you kind of drive out of Jerusalem, drive out of the big city. You're 15 minutes out of Jerusalem, and you're passing that Bedouin village, the little camel that stands there for the tourists to take pictures of. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And then the picture is left to your imagination. You know the stories, and you can read the Bible, and you can imagine your forefathers walking the very same path, north, south, Ur Kasdim, Canaan. We know the stories of Joshua, and we know what happened where. And if you take a Bible in hand, you could say, well, this is the eye. These are the 7 wells that Abraham dug in the south. And so, yes, it's very exciting to see Israel as a developed country and all the building and the cities and the historical buildings. But for me, the excitement is where there is no building, in the Judean desert, in the Negev. And you just imagine our forefathers and mothers where they walked and traveled, and the conversations they had with God, and the conversations they had with their children, and the wonders that they witnessed. To me, that's exciting about Israel. My other favorite place is a little restaurant in the old city of Israel in Jerusalem called Rami's Pizza. I don't know if you've been there before. The pizza, I hate to say this on camera, is not the best pizza in the world. But for me, it marks the return of the Jewish people to Israel for a few reasons. First of all, Rami's Pizza. Rami is a modern Hebrew name. The modern Hebrew's been around for 100 years. Number 2, they give a discount for Jewish students learning in the old city. And today there are more Jewish students learning in the old city of Jerusalem than any other time in history. There's a real renaissance. And 3, it's a place where I'd always meet my family and friends who happen to be in Israel or who have moved to Israel. So Rami's Pizza, even though it sounds like just a typical pizza joint, just is a very special place in my heart because it's the place that really marks, for me, what Jerusalem means to us. I think my hope for everyone would be to not stop at the Israel they see on TV, the political Israel of violence, and not even the Israel of the Nobel Peace Prizes and the Israel of the universities, not to stop there, but to realize Israel of the heart, and to study Israel and its history and the Bible, and to visit Israel and understand that Israel is here and how special it is. That would be my prayer. I think the important thing for people to realize is that Israelis and Jews have been willing and still are willing to make concessions for their future. And they've proven that time out and time again. And I think we have to understand that giving up land is not going to bring about peace. We don't have a partner for peace. We don't have any moderate Muslim leader in the Middle East who has stood up and said, we recognize the right of a Jewish homeland. We recognize the Jews' right to exist. And so even though it's nice to say, Israel, show some kind of benevolent action, we've proven just, 7 or 8 years ago, that giving up land is not the way that's going to bring about peace. It's not to say that Israel shouldn't be open to making concessions, but we know that giving up land is not going to bring about peace. In the summer of 2005, I believe, Israel orchestrated a unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. In Gaza, these communities, Gush Katif, they were communities that were designed by the government of Israel as a place where Jews could live. And they were there for decades, building beautiful homes and businesses and vineyards and farms. And Prime Minister Sharon decided that it was too dangerous to have soldiers protecting few Jews, thousands of Jews in this enclave of 1 million plus Arabs who didn't want the Jews there. And B, that the only way to bring about peace was to show the Arabs that we would give up some land. So in 2005, Israel took the painful step of vacating these homes and these businesses and these lives. And the IDF did an admirable job of very sensitively removing settlers from their homes. And I say settlers, but these people were very settled. I mean, these were their homes for decades, beautiful homes. And Israel had a policy where they would buy new homes for them or give them money to build new homes. And in the subsequent years, it didn't take very long to see that the homes were destroyed, the businesses were destroyed, the greenhouses, which have been a wonderful sense of income for the Palestinians, were destroyed. And in spot of building new homes and opportunity, they put rocket launchers, and used it as a hothouse for terrorists. So you not only had people leaving their homes, but they realized that they left their homes for no good reason at all. It made matters worse. I think Israel learned that vacating land is not going to do anything for peace, and it's going to make security worse. And since then, there have been a barrage of thousands of rockets from that neck of the woods to southeastern Israel. My sister and brother-in-law lived in North Jerusalem at the time. They lived in a settlement called Migron. And they were asked to move to the south a few years ago so that he could be the principal of a school for kids who had to leave Gush Katif. And JNF is developing a new community in the south, and they're building new homes for these families finally, 6 or 7 years later. And many of these kids have problems. They have problems paying attention and focusing, and a lot of the problems were the fact that they left their home, their homes were destroyed. And again, it's not as if they left their homes for a good reason. It's not as if they left their homes and peace came about. They left their homes and there was more terror. And you can imagine what that does to their psyche. And so it's kind of become a real stain in Israel's history. On the one hand, Israel tried to show good faith, show that we're willing to make difficult compromises and we're willing to make hard decisions. On the other hand, it seems like it was one of the worst decisions that had been made in the past couple decades. Ever since I came to Nashville in 2005, I began to witness something that I was not prepared for. And that was the Christian interest, thirst for authentic Jewish knowledge and practice and tradition. Not out of intellectual interest, not out of being neighborly. There was a real quench for Judaism because this is part of who Christians are. We have Christians who are keeping Jewish practices. One of my earliest memories is a Christian woman coming into my office in 2006, wanting to learn the laws of blowing the shofar, because she's the shofar blower for her church. And so we were studying Maimonides in Hebrew together. I wasn't quite sure how to deal with the question of can a non-Jew blow to dispense the obligation of a Jew, or how to explain that. Can a woman blow the shofar, a woman can't blow the shofar, that kind of thing. But there was a real desire on the part of this woman to fulfill the Jewish obligation of blowing the shofar, and that was just the beginning. You drive around Nashville and you know there's Christians who are celebrating Sukkot, Feast of Booths. You know there are Christians involved in real Torah study, not just reading a translation, but understanding what the Hebrew means and the medieval commentaries. I don't think this has happened in history before. This is something new. It's something huge. And I know that it's not just happening in Nashville, although it's very pronounced in Nashville. It's huge for two reasons. Number one, it shows the Jewish community that their religion is not just about them. And sometimes when others from the outside are interested in your faith, it kind of ignites more interest in your faith. And we need that. We really need that. But number two, there seems to be something happening in the world where Christians are reconnecting to their heritage. And I don't know where it's going to lead to, but there seems to be a coming together of these two faiths. We say the prayers, we end our prayers every day with the words, Bayomahu, Yeh Adonai Echad U'Shmo Echad, that one day everyone's going to realize that God is one and that God is great. And we're going to realize this message together. So to have these neighbors, these friends interested in a deep spiritual way, not out of intellectual interest, not out of curiosity, not out of neighborliness, but because this is who they are, who they realize they're supposed to be, is huge. And I just feel so fortunate and lucky and honored to be a part of it. We took a trip to Israel with a bunch of rabbis in town and some pastors 4 or 5 years ago. And it was such an eye-opening trip to be able to explore Israel together from our historical point of view and from their religious point of view. And one of my best memories is waking up one morning and I was sharing a room with a pastor. And out of the corner of my eye, it looked like he was sitting on the bed and I couldn't figure out what he was doing. It was early in the morning. And he's opening his Tanakh, his Old Testament, looking at the book of Zechariah or Daniel, rereading one of the promises or prophecies that God had made. It just really showed me that we do have this bond that goes back thousands of years. And so it may have parted 2,000 years ago and gone as far apart as possible. And now, in many ways, that bond is becoming strong again. And it's the distance between the two is getting smaller. And to feel that and to be a part of that, and that trip to Israel was just totally amazing, of sharing Shabbat together and the glory of Jerusalem, and from a religious point, really being able to share so much of that, our two faiths, our two peoples. And I know that trip had changed me for the rest of my life, and I can't wait to go back. PJTN came into my life 5 or 6 years ago when I met you, when I met Lori Moore and Stan. And it's evolved for me into many things. Not only standing up for Israel, which is so important, and not only educating Christians in the world, but making revolutionary, bold, theological statements about what Christianity needs to be today. And I have to tell you, as a Jew in a non-Jewish world, as a Jew in a Christian world, there's always this tension, this unspoken tension with a Jew and a Christian. Don't you want me to die in the final days? Aren't I going to hell? Replacement theology, supersessionism. Isn't my faith out of date? And the theological steps that PJTN takes that are founded on biblical doctrine are immensely important. They're crucial moving forward. So what PJTN brings to the world, to the Christian community, and to the Jewish community, is the most important thing you could ask for. When you combine that with this love and support of Israel, which is so important, and helping people awaken to what's going on in the world from a biblical or religious point of view, it just doesn't get much more important than that. A few years ago, when there was a barrage of rockets in southern Israel, we were all scared for Israel, and we all wanted to do something. And we were going to have a rally downtown, the Jewish community. For some reason, the Jewish community couldn't unify and stand up in public and say, we support Israel and we denounce terrorism. And I got a call 5 minutes later as I left the meeting. You probably remember this. I got a call that PJTN was putting on a rally to stand up for Israel, and that we were invited to join PJTN. And that's when it really solidified for me how important PJTN was. Where the Jewish community couldn't feel the courage, we didn't feel the support to stand up on our own. And PJTN booked Legislative Plaza, organized an incredible opportunity to stand up for Israel. And so that evening I came back to the synagogue after services, and I actually had a congregant with tears in his eyes. See a man crying is unusual. And said, this is what it's come to. On the one hand, why couldn't we have put on the rally ourselves? On the other hand, how beautiful is it that our Christian friends, our Christian family has stood up for Israel, led the way for us, and invited us to be a part of it. That was just such an unbelievable moment. I think the biggest myth out there today is that anti-Semitism is caused by the establishment of the State of Israel, and that the current policies of having West Bank settlements is the reason why Israel is not wanted in the world. And it's a myth for several reasons. Anti-Semitism preceded the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. You don't have to be very smart to know that. Just read a little bit of history, know the Holocaust, know the persecution in the year 1000, know what happened in Muslim lands and Christian lands to know that anti-Semitism preceded the establishment of the modern State of Israel. And anybody who says that there's anti-Semitism because of Israel, they're missing the point or they're lying. That's number one. Number two, blaming the policies and the settlements is just as ridiculous as blaming the State of Israel. Some of the settlements had existed. And number two, again, this Arab nationalism expressed through anti-Israel rhetoric happened even before 1948. So those who say that it's the fault of the settlements for all the hatred among the Palestinians for Israel are not being truthful. And what they're trying to do is find any way they can to push Israel a little bit this way and a little bit that way until there is no Israel. And if that's the key word that sticks in people's minds, the West Bank settlements, and if that's the excuse that the Western anti-Semites want to use, that's what they're going to use. But it's a lie. I think historians would mostly agree that the shidduch, the connection between Jews and America, has been a very good one. Jews are so blessed in America and have been for over 200 years as we came to the shores of New York as immigrants, having the freedom to worship and to practice our faith as we have never had before. America has been an incredible blessing to the Jews, where we've prospered, we've had the opportunity to become educated, where we can play a role in our own destiny. And I think in exchange, America, in a certain sense, has been blessed by the Jewish people. And there's two kinds of anti-Semitism. There's explicit anti-Semitism, I hate Jews. And there's the New Age anti-Semitism, where people won't come out and say it, but they'll use a nuanced language. And beneath the language, it's clear that they hate Jews. As a kid, I always heard about the old anti-Semitism in America. The South, the Ku Klux Klan, David Duke, some of the political figures who expressed anti-Semitism openly. As a kid walking to synagogue on the Sabbath, you'd hear the slurs, and most of them were by ignorant teens, immature adults, just trying to express their frustration, shout out whatever came to their mind, honk their horn. So I grew up with that and was pretty quick to dismiss it as I grew up and saw these were just uneducated folks, angry about something. It didn't really do that much harm. Today we're finding a different kind of anti-Semitism that expresses itself in a very intellectual way, with a lot of nuance, denying the State of Israel to exist, calling it an apartheid state, questioning Jewish practices such as the right to a circumcision, even the kosher slaughter of animals. This is going on a little bit in America, a lot in Europe, And it's certainly a cause for concern. I would say the overwhelming majority of Americans are very tolerant, very respectful of different faiths, and we enjoy the support and we share that respect. But there is this growing tide of anti-Semitism that we really have to be concerned about and have to pay attention to, not only across the ocean, but right here at home. And I have to say, it does bother me, and we have to really do whatever we can to stem its growth and to just open our eyes to what's going on. One day we got a call from the FBI notifying us that there was a gentleman who tried to firebomb our home. He had looked up rabbis in the phone book, found one. He had been trained as a terrorist for Al-Qaeda, born and bred in the States. And one of the things he was trying to accomplish in life was to kill people, Americans and Jews. And we got a call saying he had indeed gone through the act. The firebomb had not gone off because he was not a successful bomb builder. He'd only been in the business a year or two. Had it gone off, we'd be dead. And it took the FBI several months to connect the dots to understand whose home it was, whose home he was going for. And it was scary. And it was so scary that when we moved homes to the home we're living in now, we had special equipment put in the home. I'm not going to tell you what it is, to protect us from certain terrorist incidents. I have no connection with this person. He doesn't know who I am. All he knows is that I'm a Jew. And that's all that matters. And we have footage from terrorist training cells in certain parts of the world, some closer, some further away, that this is what people are training to do, to go out and kill people. And as opposed to the United States military forces, which polices the world and tries to stop people from doing this, there are countries and organizations in the world where their goal is to kill. And if there is one young man like this, there could be many more like this. So as a Jew, it can give me some pause. As an American, it gives me pause. As a rabbi, it gives me pause. Am I putting my family in harm's way by trying to lead my faith a little bit, by serving my community? I was born a Jew, and that's not going to change. I was born an American. That's not going to change. I'm a proud Jew, and I'm a proud American. America is the best country in the world. So in many ways, I don't know what to think. What I do feel is incredibly thankful to God. I feel thankful to be part of a supportive community that will do whatever they need to do to protect us. And I have to have faith that we'll be protected and this won't happen again. One of the biggest problems to come out of 1948 is the Palestinian refugees. Hundreds of thousands with no homes, living in tents, little hope, no education. And that's a real stumbling block to moving forward. And nobody's offered any real solutions for them. And same time in 1948, as Palestinians were forced to leave their homes where they were living, close to 1 million Jews were forced to leave their homes, to leave their lives from Arab countries, to leave their businesses, to leave their places of worship, to leave their houses that they'd built. And you wonder why this isn't a bigger part of the story. Just to understand that it wasn't only the Israeli state that caused others to be displaced. And the answer why we don't hear the story is very simple. And that is that Jews took care of their brethren. The 800,000 went where they could go, and they started lives, and they made new homes, and they did what they were called to do. And it's a huge story. 1948 was difficult for Palestinians, and how much more so for the Jews. But the story ended differently because of our attitude of accepting the other, but accepting ourselves and saying, we're going to make this work. We're not going to blame our lives on the other. we're going to do what we've done for millennia, and that is survive and thrive. So the story of the 800,000 Jews who had to flee from their homes, it's an incredible story. It's a tragic story, but it's also a heroic story. It has a happy ending. And if we could share some of that with our neighbors, so that their tragic story from 1948 is not prolonged today as an excuse why Israel can't be Israel, or why Jews shouldn't have the right to live, because everybody has a right to live. And if they take some of what we did and used it for their future, we'd be in a different place today. It's scary. I guess I graduated college about 15 years ago, and I went to Yeshiva University, so I didn't really experience that phenomenon. But there is this very scary growing phenomenon of professors using their charismatic authority and their knowledge to share and impart their hatred of Israel upon their students, using whatever terminology and concepts are easiest to use. The kids are very impressionable. As Americans, we're always up for morals and for people's rights. And the movement of college kids that have been indoctrinated into this hatred of Israel is very scary. I mean, anybody who's a progressive, if you're a liberal progressive, Israel should be your poster boy. If you think about the equality between women and men, having a female prime minister, gay pride, healthcare, in so many ways, Israel should be the poster child for these progressive intellectual professors on these college campuses. Yet, Israel's one challenge, which is a huge challenge but not its biggest challenge, in terms of how to deal with the Palestinian people, to use that as a wrench and say that Israel does not have the right to exist, we need to divest. When as Americans, we have our own moral problems, we have our own challenges. Well, look at all the other countries. Look at the countries where you're hanged for acting out homosexuality, or for, as a woman if you wanted to drive a car, or whatever it was. To pick Israel and no other country to say we're going to divest and boycott and criticize and belittle and say you have no right to exist, it's very, very, very troubling. And it's growing. And we have to try to do everything we can to provide our kids, all kids, with an education about what the history of Israel is, the modern history, how Israel has behaved, how it does treat the others, how, except from America and the northern, what the countries in this coast or the countries in the modern world, Israel is the only country in the Middle East where everybody has rights, women and men, and of any faith.